So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marlon Apanyada. I'm the convener of the Greening the Banks Initiative and also the Southeast Asia Engagement Lead for the World Resources Institute. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. And we will just wait for a few industry colleagues to join us in the room, and we can start in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Please stand by, and we look forward to a robust and rich discussion this afternoon. All right, we can start. Good afternoon, partners and colleagues, and I hope everyone has been keeping safe, healthy, and well. Welcome to the Greening the Banks Industry Dialogue for Commercial Banks and RE Developers, focused on new renewable energy market-making mechanisms. I am Marlon Apanyada, Strategic Advisor to Allotrope Partners and convener of this Greening the Banks initiative. I am honored to host and moderate today's timely dialogue, learn more about the new developments in the country's renewable energy space, and find out how relevant market players can participate and take action on the opportunities that these new RE market making mechanisms bring. Next slide, please. We begin today's program with some quick context setting slides to be then followed by a presentation on leveraging the Philippines offshore wind roadmap, perspectives from a wind industry developer, for which we will be hearing from Mr. Theo Sunico, Vice President of Triconti ECC Renewables Corporation. We will then hear from Ms. Gian Karla Canales Gutierrez, Manager for Power Economics, Industry and Regulatory Affairs of First Gen Corporation, to discuss the reaction from a renewable energy developer on the green energy auctions. We will conclude our dialogue today with an open forum where in addition to our speakers, we will also be joined by guests from Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, or RCBC, to get their reactions and insights from a bank's perspective. Please feel free to send in your questions in the Q&A box at any point during the program. And this event will be recorded and posted on Allotrope Partners YouTube and website for future reference. So I hope that's fine with everyone. Next slide, please. So we will introduce this initiative of ours that we started with our community of stakeholders way back in 2019. So the Greening the Banks initiative, or GTB, is led by Allotrope Partners, a clean energy advisory firm headquartered in the United States, with on-the-ground staff operating across Southeast Asia, including the Philippines. Greening the Banks, which we launched together with you and other stakeholders in 2019, seeks to build the capacity of Southeast Asian public and private sector financial institutions to actively participate in green finance. So through GTB, we are engaging with the different stakeholders to bridge the gap among banks, regulators, developers, and civil society organizations to unlock scaled green investments in the region, starting with the Philippines. Next slide, please. Since our launch, we have been able to cultivate and build a coalition of sustainability finance leaders in the Philippines, including a full range of Philippines banks, as well as key government officials, regulators such as the Central Bank of the Philippines or Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, and other market stakeholders. We have also supported BSP's launch of the groundbreaking Philippines Sustainable Finance Framework. From last year to date, we've had an opportunity to design and host, in collaboration with the BSP and expert speakers, a series of dialogues on climate-related physical and transition risks and green finance challenges and opportunities. Through these webinars and dialogues, we've been able to engage over 550 participants, representing more than 160 local banks across the Philippines, along with a range of other energy and finance market stakeholders. Next slide, please. And so for the earlier part of this year, Greening the Banks focused on further cultivating our engagement with the central bank through a two-part webinar series to help build the capacity of rural and cooperative and thrift banks on climate-related risks in support of the central bank's efforts to embed sustainable finance principles into the operations of rural and cooperative and thrift banks. A more focused discussion on transition risk management also provided these banks with an overview on the general concepts and the steps involved in the transition risk management integration process, as well as the impacts to the banking operations of community banks. Next slide, please. So moving forward from our previous BSP-focused engagements, we now head into discussions that would further highlight the renewable energy, the relationship and engagement between renewable energy developers and banks and commercial banks, especially now with the emergence of new policies and business models in the renewable energy space. As the government continues to build on its initiatives in achieving the country's renewable energy targets, including those ensconced in the Philippine National Renewable Energy Plan, such as, for example, the release of the Philippine Offshore Wind Roadmap and the ongoing planning and implementation of RE policies like the green energy auctions. We want to provide a venue to convene commercial banks and RE developers to identify risks and opportunities and share best practices and lessons learned to be able to come up with a pipeline of bankable projects relative to these new RE market-making mechanisms. So we hope that through this dialogue today, we will be able to help explore options on how banks and RE developers can work together to ensure that project risks are understood and addressed, as well as discuss ways to provide financing to developers and help unlock renewable energy investments. All right, so with this, we now proceed to the presentation of our resource speakers, starting with Mr. Theo Sunico, who will be discussing leveraging the Philippines Offshore Wind Roadmap, perspectives from a wind industry developer. Mr. Theo Sunico is the Vice President as well as the Director for Regulatory and Markets for Triconti ECC Renewables Corporation. Joining the industry during the passage of the IPIRA law, he has been able to experience firsthand the transformation brought by the privatization and deregulation law from the inside through his work in the fields of energy marketing, trading, regulatory affairs, and capacity sourcing for both conventional fuel and renewable energy generation companies. Before devoting himself fully to wind energy development with Triconti, he previously served as president and board member of the Philippine Hydro Association and served as the generation representative to the Rules Change Committee of the Philippine Electricity Market Corporation, or PEMC. So with that, please give a virtual round of applause to Mr. Theo Sunico, who will be now joining us and share his thoughts. Sir Theo, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Marlon. Good afternoon, everyone. we'd like to thank Allotrope Partners for this opportunity today to share our experiences, no, as well as some recommendations to move the sector forward. And we look forward to a fruitful discussion with all of you on this exciting new frontier for renewable energy in the Philippines. So next presentation, please. Okay, the next page. Okay, so let me begin first by giving a quick introduction and introduce our company, the Triconti Windcraft Group. We're a joint venture between Filipino and German-Swiss renewable energy professionals. As Triconti, we saw in the passage of the RE Act of 2008 an opportunity for independent developers to contribute meaningfully to the Philippines' clean energy ambitions. Stream Invest Holdings, meanwhile, looks at developing economies like the Philippines that are making the energy transition and enters into strategic partnerships with local RE developers to share their technical expertise and experience. With more than 30 years of combined experience in both local and global markets and industry, we've been able to build a pipeline of an estimated 450 megawatts in onshore wind and pioneer development of 3.5 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity in the Philippines, making us into the largest independent wind project developer to date. So in 2018, we started to look at the potential for offshore wind projects in the Philippines, and in 2020 was the first developer to apply for and be awarded service contracts by the Department of Energy, covering 4 areas in Luzon and the Visayas and divided into 6 service contracts. Next page, please. By being the first into the offshore wind sector, we knew we had taken a lot of pressure on our shoulders to do this right from the start. No? The only way we could ensure that to do that was to partner with a global developer that could provide the knowledge and experience that literally and figuratively would help us lay the foundations to build this new sector on. So earlier this year, we were fortunate to sign an agreement with Iberdrola to do just that. Iberdrola is a Spanish multinational electric utility company based in Bilbao, Spain. It's a global energy leader and is the second largest offshore wind developer in the world. There's a global pipeline of 81.5 gigawatts of power projects, of which 25.2 gigawatts is invested in the offshore wind capacity alone. They currently manage about 34.8 gigawatts of installed RE capacity and intend to triple this to over 95 gigawatts by end 2030. By then, we certainly intend to have the first generation of offshore wind farms in the Philippines up and running to number among that number. So before we move forward, I think I need to expound on why we believe that the promise of offshore wind and our rationale for pursuing its development in the Philippine context. Next page. So the past decade has seen a great, though gradual, acceptance that we are transitioning towards renewable energy generation. No? Our recent experiences of the pandemic and now the war between Ukraine and Russia, its impact on commodity prices and logistical supply crunches have plainly underscored our energy sector's vulnerability due to our reliance on imported fuel. Stronger typhoons and changing weather patterns also highlight the need to transition towards cleaner energy, alternatives for ourselves, but that also help power our continuing economic growth. We believe that offshore wind technology bridges that gap to help the Philippines achieve its RE objectives and its large-scale requirements. It provides us energy security through independence from imported fuel, provides a scale to replace fossil fuel-generated capacity, and at that price point, that given scale would be cost competitive. Offshore wind has been described as by the International Energy Agency as a variable base load generation, one of the few technologies that can provide clean power at a large cost competitive scale. The Philippines, based on the World Bank study, has a technical potential of 178 gigawatts. Majority of that in floating technology, but about 18 to 20 gigawatts with potential in fixed floating. So we believe that with adequate flexible generation to support it, we can definitely address our most ambitious future demands. So now, again, you may be wondering, though, what's the difference between onshore and offshore wind projects? No? So we're quite all familiar with wind power technology. That is a mature technology. So what's the big deal? Next page, please. Well, the big deal, I guess, would be to start with the turbines. Here's a graphic to provide some size comparisons versus some select Philippine landmarks. No? Taal Volcano, the mother of all Asia Tower of Peace, as well as Metrobank Tower. The current onshore wind turbines installed are the 2 megawatt capacities that average out about 90 meters in height. These are dwarfed in size and output by the current industry standard for offshore installations of between 8 to 10 megawatt turbines. Each blade of these turbines is longer than the 747, as you can see up on top, and we expect them to get bigger as floating wind turbine technology develops and evolves. So, GE already has a working prototype of a 12 megawatt turbine installed in 2019. And it therefore guarantees that once the first offshore wind turbine in the Philippines is installed, it will definitely be one of the tallest structures to be found here. In terms of output, a single 10 megawatt turbine takes up about 4,000 square meters of space for its base and would be able to power approximately 7,000 Philippine households. A solar farm would need between 20 to 30 hectares to generate an equivalent amount of energy to equal that one turbine. So offshore wind, combining the scale of large hydro and the complexity of oil and gas extraction, will therefore require significant technical, financial resources, and combined with a political will to attract the necessary investment in the future. Next slide. So to provide additional information, let me compare the differences between an onshore and offshore wind farm development. For onshore wind, a commercially viable project size is between 30 to 50 megawatts. So, largest existing park we have in the Philippines is the Burgos Wind Farm at 150 megawatts. For offshore wind, we see that a first generation park would need to have at least between 400 to 600 megawatts to be attractive, enough to consider development. As for turbine sizes, planned onshore turbines are already breaching the 5 megawatt capacity, while for onshore, 16 megawatt turbines have already been announced and are actually being offered already by some suppliers for delivery in 1 to 2 years. So it also takes longer for offshore wind development. Current timelines will average between 5 to 7 years for pre-development and construction in another 2 to 3 years. So for onshore, if properly regulatory frameworks are in place, can be developed from start to finish in 4 to 5 years. So again, much longer time frame for offshore. In terms of development cost, onshore project can be developed for around $2 to $3 million, not including construction. For offshore development, for the development stage alone, we expect costs to run between 20 to 30 million US dollars. And the estimates for a 1 gigawatt project right now for full development is about 2 to 3 billion US. That's why it normally happens that consortia are formed around these projects to build it and to de-escalate, to de-risk the project, of course, for investors all around. So these are daunting numbers, but the potential benefits also make it clearly worth the risk. One, as a variable baseload energy technology, it delivers consistent, balanced, and stable energy. Capacity factors of more than 52% have already been achieved in some projects in Europe, and the technology continues to evolve, and we expect that these capacity factors will only continue to rise. More predictable output also helps reduce the need for power balancing, contributing to transmission system reliability and security. Out on the water, they also do not face the logistical challenges faced by onshore projects of bringing their long blades up curving roads and steep ridges. On a per turbine basis, they also use a very small area of ocean, and due to the distances between them, allow for safe corridors of passage for shipping. So you're not forced to basically choose between using the space for something else as well as generating energy. You have to avoid having to build on any agricultural land. And studies have shown that the foundations of these structures can also help us act as artificial reefs, and with proper stewardship can actually increase biodiversity in these areas that they're installed. So the scale of offshore wind also provides a unique opportunity to spur economic development through the attraction of significant foreign direct investment, creation of a local supply chain to service not just local, but even regional demand. As you may well know, the offshore wind areas also in Taiwan, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam are also growing at an incredibly fast pace. So on a high growth scenario, offshore wind also has the potential to create an estimated between 15 to 20,000 plus full-time employment by 2040, depending on the slow or fast growth of the sector. So what is clear here is that there's a need for offshore wind to be handled as a technology category distinct from onshore wind. We believe it's only under this scenario which the sector will have opportunity to grow to its full potential. Next page. On how to enable these policies, well, the Philippine offshore, sorry, wait a bit. Okay, sorry. What needs now to be done to facilitate investment into this new RE sector? So the Philippines has some inherent socio-economic and policy factors that make the Philippines attractive to investors. To list some of them, these are the growing population, our steady economic growth, as well as a clear supply gap between the growing demand and available supply, a lack of indigenous fossil fuel resources, and a welcome policy shift towards energy security and independence, clearly represented by the moratorium on the building of new coal plants. However, as already discussed, developing offshore wind is both capital and time intensive, and investors need assurances that they will have government support, access to capital markets, and the time to actually build these mega projects now. So what I've tried to do is to use the World Bank. This is a World Bank structure that they identified 4 pillars of what are needed to develop an offshore wind sector. In our own experiences, this is also the common denominator between the discussions we've had with our investors and what we need to further develop in terms of attracting more players into this sector in the Philippines. So the 4 pillars that the World Bank has identified are 1, strategy, policy, framework, and delivery. Since it's early stages, let me focus first on the first 3 pillars. And how I've categorized this, if you look through the list, I apologize, it's quite wordy. But color coding it is that green is what I believe we already have. Blue is what we can improve, and red is still what needs to be developed. So again, to reiterate, I think the perspective we have to take from here is that first and foremost, this assumes that offshore wind is held and treated distinctly as a technology. A technology distinct from onshore wind by the Department of Energy. So the first pillar, strategy, or asking the question on whether or not we want offshore wind in the Philippines. We've already answered this question. One, through the Philippine Energy Plan, wherein the Philippine government has already identified that it wants to increase green energy generation in our power mix up to 35% by 2030 and up to 50% by 2040. However, but this is a general target for the entire RE industry. There's no specific target yet illustrated for the different technologies. So for offshore wind, the good thing, though, is that the DOE has already begun collaboration with the World Bank and industry consultants such as the Global Wind Energy Council to explore how offshore wind can be used as a foundation for the energy transition, but how this is translated into policy and frameworks and actionable items remains to be seen. So the second pillar, policy, would refer to specific legislation and guidelines that would provide the market long-term confidence on the implementation of the government's strategy. Again, all existing legislation and guidelines is still directed towards onshore wind and offshore wind development lumped together. But that can be extracted and developed from there. So it doesn't have to start from scratch for offshore. So key among this, I think, just to highlight, would be addressing the barriers for the entry of more than 40% ownership in RE projects, because the 40% limitation really puts a crimp in terms of coming up with consortiums, because it's difficult for the international developers to find partners wanting to develop projects, but then they're limited to, and putting up that much capital and resources, but being limited to 40% of the ownership structure. So we do hope that this is something that can be addressed. And providing clear installation targets for the technology, as well as expected dates of delivery, and even LCOE targets moving forward, to show also how much we want to be able to achieve And it clearly addresses also the question of scale of how big we want to grow. So the next one on framework, no, on how to enable these new policies. The good thing here is that the Philippine offshore wind roadmap is a good start. It provides a comprehensive framework on how to do so. But given the fact that we have an incoming administration, it remains to be seen whether the recommendations contained in the roadmap, how will they be implemented and when. But we do hope that they are implemented and soon. The other one, as mentioned earlier, previous frameworks that cater to other RE technologies can easily be amended to apply to offshore wind. So that actually is a plus for us, that we have a lot of ways to operationalize things already. So one would be to expand the coverage of the Energy Virtual One-Stop Shop, or the EVOS system, as well as amending the WESEC guidelines to account for the longer development timelines for offshore wind. Because right now, as mentioned, offshore wind still falls under the same 5-year development program for onshore. Then the other one will be, of course, the key to getting all the relevant stakeholders, the government agencies, and all the social civic groups aligned and on board with their roles and responsibilities, especially in the area of seabed rights, transmission interconnection, and the offtake markets, of course, as we all know. So just to maybe wrap it all up in what we think as an investor and as a developer, what the top 3 important points here would be. One would be finding a way to address the foreign ownership limitations on the projects. The second would be to provide clear installation targets moving forward, as well as LCOE, levelized cost of electricity targets as well for the technology moving forward. And the last would probably be clear offtake markets, such as the green energy auction that's taking place right now. So to wrap up, there remains much to do, but we are buoyed by the resources that the Department of Energy has already brought to bear on developing the preliminary roadmap to offshore wind development in such a short amount of time. So as developers, we are used to wading into gray areas and figuring out the right ways forward as we develop our projects. So with the learnings that we've had in the past decade, as well as in the existing global best practices available, we look forward to working closely with the stakeholders to fill in the gaps and make existing environment more conducive to the growth of this exciting new sector. So with that, thank you very much.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sir Theo. Very interesting to see these new sets of information. We have been truly curious about the offshore wind industry and how it will unfold, and it's great that Triconti is now at the forefront of this new frontier, so to speak, right? I have several questions, and the Q&A box also has a few questions. So I think before we proceed with the next speaker, Ms. Gian Karla Canales Gutierrez of First Gen, we'll just clear some of the Q&A, some clarificatory questions from the Q&A box, so that we can go deep and with some questions during the industry dialogue. So I think a basic question is the transmission plan of the NGCP currently aligned with the potential offshore wind development plan? And so that's a first question to be asked. Before we can go into questions about bankability, timelines, and guaranteed offtakes. Go ahead, Sir Theo.
Okay. Right now, we are working, of course, with NGCP for some of our projects. But in terms of the NGCP transmission timeline, yes, there is a misalignment between what the expected development times are with the NGCP. And I think one thing that's important to note also is that the NGCP, as all of us know, it's a new sector. So their mindset, and this is something we've had to work with them to help them open up their experiences, that we're not talking about the previous onshore wind installations that were about 30, 50, or even the largest is 150. But even for the first stage, we are looking already at 450, 600 megawatt sizes. And this is something that we're trying to work also with the GWEC to be able to provide real-world basically data to the NGCP on how to accept such large variable energy inputs into our power grid, no, given its current system. So
Alright.
there has to be some adjustment, yes, to this one, and a lot of learnings on both sides.
Yeah, I like the terms misalignment, adjustment, and learning. So I think those are the key words as regards that question. I think very quickly, Sir Theo, let's answer this. What is the current view of insurance companies as regards underwriting the risks of these offshore wind developments, given the scale, the size, and the location? Have you considered this, or have you had case studies on what the risk insurance coverages are and how they affect the cost?
Okay, thank you. I'll try to answer this quickly. Now, for now, of course, it's very early stage, at least for us here in the Philippines. However, one thing to note also is that offshore wind globally, is a mature technology. So definitely there are a lot of underwriters already, especially in areas that have stronger winds, and waves, such as the North Sea. What needs to be done, we believe in this, would be to localize it, of course, to the Philippine situation. No? So the considerations here, of course, would be the typhoon strengths. No? But most of the projects that at least we are looking at are in the inner waterways of the Philippines, and therefore mostly outside of the typhoon pathways, or the traditional typhoon pathways at least. So this is something that we considered, but again, this is very preliminary, and we'll be working forward, of course, with the insurers with this. Right now, we don't have enough actually to be able to answer that properly.
Okay, and I would assume that there's a related question about logistics and the availability of ships and everything. Those are very, the project's development stage is very, very early right now, but there are case examples from other jurisdictions. Correct. Where you can learn. All right.
Correct.
All right, so we'll pause there and we'll get back to you, Sir Theo, in the industry dialogue part. And so thank you for sharing your thoughts. I have several questions in my head, but let's proceed because we're so eager to hear from our next speaker who will discuss green energy auctions. I know it's one of those questions that you in the audience have been very keen to learn more on. For our next speaker, we will talk about green energy auctions and the reaction from a renewable energy developer. And we will hear from Ms. Gian Karla, Canales Gutierrez, who is currently the manager for power economics, industry and regulatory affairs of First Gen Corporation. She leads and coordinates industry research, forecasting, macroeconomic indices, and commodity prices, and analyzing state policies, contracts, reports, and studies. Ms. Gutierrez is also involved in FGen's power marketing efforts in terms of power supply trading and contracting. So, Ms. Gian, the floor is yours. We're eager to hear and learn from you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marlon. Am I supposed to pull up my own screen, or do you have my presentation?
We can share screen from our end.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, and hi also to Theo. Long time. Good to see you. So for this afternoon, we will be sharing with you the perspective of an RE developer for the green energy auctions, and we thank Allotrope Partners for inviting us to this. We would just like to say that we fully support activities such as this, because the goals of scaling renewable energy investments by strengthening green finance capacities is very important to us. And for this, I would like to start by sharing some of our slides. So for the next slide. So recent events and those from the past few years have shown more momentum on the clean energy transition, and global developments such as the COVID pandemic, the Australia-China coal bans, and the Indonesian export restrictions, as well as the UK-Russia conflict, have exerted more and more pressure against the use of and over-dependence on fossil fuels. And this has also been mentioned in the earlier presentation. But in the next slide, I am very happy to note that the international momentum towards a clean and renewable energy transition has also been reflected by policies in our country, with the DOE making its own commitments and declarations supporting the clean energy transition, including steps such as the declaration of the coal moratorium, the setting of the RE generation share targets, and the implementation of pending RPS incentives such as the GEOP and the GIAP, which we will be discussing in this segment. On the next slide, we'd just like to recall that the RE Acts provide several fiscal and non-fiscal incentives to support RE development and utilization. So we have the likes of the net metering program that allows installations below 100 kilowatts to sell excess generation to the grid. There's also the feed-in tariffs, which provide long-term contracts paid for and shared by all end users for the successful increase of RE development. And we saw this happen actually sometime in 2008 when a lot of RE facilities came into the grid. And also recently, just in March 2022, we just had the Green Energy Option Program, or the GEOP, which allowed customers with at least 100 kilowatts of average monthly demand to actually choose their own renewable energy supplier. But for this afternoon, again, we will be exploring GIAP. And I think we should discuss this in relation to the Renewable Portfolio Standard Programs, which is the mother program for GIAP. So on the next slide, the RPS, or the Renewable Portfolio Standard, is an RE Act incentive where mandated entities like distribution utilities, electric cooperatives, renewable energy suppliers, generation companies with with directly connected customers are required to source a fixed portion of their electricity sales from renewable energy. Currently, this fixed portion is at 1% annual increments starting from compliance year 1 in 2020. However, we have seen draft rules on the proposal to increase such annual increments from 1% to 2.52%. And this is because studies have shown that NREP targets the Renewable Energy Program targets of 35% RE share by 2030 and 50% RE share by 2040 would be unattainable at status quo. And so they created a program that would help us reach that, and that is supposed to be, and one of those is supposed to be the Green Energy Auction Program. On the next slide, we're enumerating the different ways RPS compliance can be achieved. So the first, most basic way for you to get an RE certificate, or the certificate that guarantees that you have purchased 1 megawatt hour of RE generation, is through power supply agreement. So if you're a distribution utility, you're or electric cooperative, or a RES, if you enter into a power supply agreement with an RE developer, the equivalent megawatt hours from that agreement will have equivalent RE certificates. So that's what you will use for your for your RPS compliance. So if you're also a D or an EC where locators have put up net metering or self-generating RE facilities in their rooftops, the resulting RE certificates from those would also redound to the DU. As well, if there are locators in the DU or the EC's franchise area that avail of the Green Energy Option Program, they also get the RECs from those. Now, if you're an RE generator, a power plant, and you sold your energy instead of through a power supply agreement, you sell it to the spot market, the RE certificates from that redound to the RE generator. The same way, if you're an RE generator and you have a directly connected customer, the equivalent RE certificates for that also stay with the RE generator. Now, there are also RE certificates that are automatically awarded to all mandated participants. That would be RE certificates from the feed-in tariff, because that is prorated across all mandated participants in the grid. And following that is the Green Energy Auction Program. So it's designed to mimic the feed-in tariff setup where all the RE certificates that would be generated from contracts awarded under the GIAP would also be shared by all mandated participants. Okay. So on the next slide, so you will see now here the relationship between RPS, the GIAP, and something that has to happen in between, the renewable energy market. What we've noticed, despite the achievements in achieving some of the milestones for GIAP, some of the requirements for the RE market to actually be operating is not yet in place. So despite the first compliance year happening in 2020, the main platform for compliance, the REM, is yet to be fully operational. So what we have now are just data validations, but we have yet to see actual RE certificates to be issued because there is the absence of the RE market. And without this market, RE developers with excess RE certificates and mandated entities that actually require extra certificates will not have a platform or mechanism to do the trading. And even non-mandated entities such as industrial customers who would also have interest in the use of RE certificates would have no platform to access this. So customers such as this are currently just using international equivalents of these RE certificates like the IREC or the Tigers. But they have expressed interest in using our own Philippine RECs should the market allow them to participate and should the market be actually established. And so for the whole RPS GIAP REM mechanism to be in full force, we hope that the REM could be operational before the year ends and before the first GIAP contract start delivering by next year. So talking about that timeline, we move to the next slide. So what we see here is just a summary of how the GIAP has evolved. We traced it as far back as when the RE Act was enacted. And you see that a lot of steam has picked up around late last year, especially early this year when DOE issued the first notice for the GIAP auction. And it is there that they set the timelines for when the ERCs should publish and set the draft year prices and so on. And so we've seen those milestones achieved sometime in May. We saw the ERC release its first draft for the green energy auction reserve price or the price cap. And then we saw them finalize it later on in that month. In May, it also was the month where the participants started registering those who would like to offer their supply to the GIAP auction. They did that in May. And now here we are in June. So we saw the DOE posting the list of qualified bidders. We saw the DOE conducting pre-bid conferences, and next in the steps would be for the DOE to conduct the actual auction, which I believe is sometime this week, and for them to announce the notices of award by probably the end of the month. And should these milestones be achieved within this month, it is expected that, as we said, the delivery of supply would have to happen sometime between the start of next year, 2023 and 2025. So for the next slide, what we see here are some of the policy details related to GIAP. So for this round, the ERC was the one who set the price caps or the gear prices. That's what you see on the table highlighted in yellow. And it is notable that the gear prices are set lower than the feed-in tariff rates. If you can see it, it's in the fourth column on the left box. And during public consultations, we saw many RE developers commenting that the gear price assumption should be adjusted. And some of them are even saying that the gear prices are set too low. And I guess we shall see this week if the final issued gear prices will prove to be sufficient for the bidders. If none, or if majority of registered bidders would be pushing through with their actual bids. On the other hand, the DOE established the capacity targets for the auction terms and procedures. And what we saw over the last few weeks was over 5,000 megawatts have signified interest to bid for just the 2,000 megawatts of initial GIAP capacity set for this auction round. So in a sense, GAP is good for RE developers because it will provide us long-term contracts at fixed rates. And this will also help GAP winners to secure necessary financing, as long-term contracts are usually required by banks. However, with the limited capacity available for contracting under this round alone, there would be around 3,000 megawatts who would have to find other contracting opportunities, or would have to go merchant and sell to the WSM, if not just scrap the project altogether, if they would not get any slot under the GAP program. So it would be good for RE developers if banks and other financial institutions would consider financial programs or lendings to merchant RE developers or those who intend to sell to the retail market, like the ARCOA and the GEOP, because unlike long-term PSAs, contracts under the retail market are shorter, just 2-year contracts. So it would be good if, I think I heard that DBP has a program similar to this, so it would be interesting to hear the next speaker talk about that later. On the next slide, we summarize here some of our recommendations and policy adjustments that we hope could help improve further implementation of the Green Energy Auction Program. So for the first one, on the auction procedures, we noted for the first round of GAP, the gear was actually finalized only after the developers have been already required to register their participation. So with gear supposedly serving as a price signal for investment, it would have been more efficient for it to be set well before any auction proceedings have commenced. And for this, it would be more efficient if a clearer and more defined timeline could be set for the next auction rounds, for the next GAP rounds. As for the issue on transmission, one of the primary concerns of an RE developer is the matter of grid connectivity. Acknowledging this, the DOE, together with the USAID and NREL, developed the CREST, the Competitive Retail Energy Zones. And it's a much needed step toward the necessary transition planning, as it identified the efficient RE resource areas that would require significant transmission infrastructure. However, since it has been released in 2020, we have actually yet to see the CRES fully integrated into actual transmission plans and programs. And so we understand there's an upcoming regulatory reset for transmission wheeling rates, and we hope that with these applications, we will start to see how the CRES will be integrated into the expected transmission projects and programs for the next rate applications of our grid operator. And related to the matter of grid security, another matter that needs to be addressed is on ancillary services. So with the entry of more variable renewable energy capacity for us to reach our 2030 target and 2040 targets, there will also be a need for us to increase the grid flexibility through facilities that can perform different reserve functions. To ensure the competitiveness of ancillary service contracting through CSPs and transparency on AS price signals and dispatching through the reserve market are essential for us to encourage also developers to invest on the complementary AS facilities for renewable energy technologies. Now, for the next point on the GAP allowance. So we just assumed that since the GAP is designed to mimic that of the FIT, it will have a similar mechanism in terms of the collection of the fees and the disbursement of the allowance that is due to the developers. So given this, we foresee that it could possibly inherit some of the problems that is already being experienced by those under the FIT round. But at this point, we have yet to see the actual GAP allowance mechanism, and it would be ideal if such would include provisions to safeguard against collection and disbursement issues that we have already identified under the FIT. Now, for the fourth point on the GAP for geothermal and hydro. So I'm not sure if you noticed, but um, in the first round of auctions, it's not yet complete in terms of the technologies that should be included in GAP. As designed according to the Department of Energy circular, the GAP should also cover auctions for geothermal and impounding hydro. However, for this round, only those technologies that are already under the FIT have been included because as we mentioned, most of the mechanisms and the pricing structures of the FIT were applied for this GAP round. However, it is important for us to include all the big show technologies, including geothermal and hydro, because geothermal and hydro provide complementary stable RE supply to the variability of other RE technologies. And without the full arsenal of all our RE technologies in the Philippines, it would be far more difficult, if not impossible, for us to reach our RE generation share aspirations. So we hope to see more developments towards the GAP for geothermal and impounding hydro at the soonest. And on that end, we would be happy to share inputs to the developers of the policy to help in arriving at capacity targets and pricing mechanisms for geothermal and impounding hydro. Now, for the second to the last point, the REM. So as previously mentioned, the renewable energy market has yet to be fully operational. And without this platform, there is no venue for renewable energy certificate transactions. So it's important to have this established at the soonest possible, especially with the commencement of GAP delivery by 2023. And lastly, but probably most important, it is essential for the success of GAP and the NREP targets as a whole to have a synchronized long-term program by a central planning entity. So we have very good policies in place. We see the RE Act, we see the NREP, the CRIS, the Energy Efficiency Act, and as mentioned earlier, the offshore wind roadmap. But what is missing is a consolidation, a harmonization of all such programs into clear long-term milestones. There is also a question of who should be the entity best to perform such monitoring and central planning function. And for RE investors and developers, I think would be more enticed to participate if there is a clearer and more definitive roadmap in view of our national RE and clean energy aspirations. Okay. For the next slide, we just hope that the observations what we shared from our perspective as an RE developer of GAP's early days of operation would be helpful in further improving the implementation of the GAP. The success of this and other RE support mechanisms are of utmost importance given the necessary urgency of our climate actions. So we need radical transformations that not just sustainably minimizes, but heals, restores, and regenerates. So for FGen, together with Allotrope and all the other attendees here today, I hope we all continue to be partners in collaborating toward a decarbonized and regenerative future. I think that's my last slide. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Gian, Karla, and we truly appreciate all the contributions of FGen in this industry. We've been working together for quite some time to make sure that our shared goals of inclusive and responsive energy transition is achieved. And thanks for sharing your thoughts. So I guess some questions and observations, and we can just clear a couple of questions from the chat box. As far as you're aware, how is the process like for the auctions? Is the DOE the one facilitating these auctions in terms of the selection criteria, the information shared across all those that participate? What has been your observations or insights on the process?
Yes, I think, yeah, in terms of process, it's really the DOE taking the lead on this. So they are the ones that set the timeline. So they are the ones also conducting the platform for the auction. So they are the ones issuing the terms of references and all the details. And I think the task that they relegated to the ERC was in terms of establishing the price caps. But for most of the activity for the GAP, it is mainly the DOE conducting it.
All right. And one of the main highlights of your presentation is the need for the renewable energy market to be established for all these certificates to be traded. Without the REM being in place right now, would projects be considered, would still be considered bankable? Should they get awarded GAP allocations without the certificates? Is that still possible?
I think it is still possible. However, the certificates is actually I guess one revenue stream for a developer, because if you do have excess RE certificates, you do have the option of trading those and monetizing those as well. So you would have income streams not just from the sale of actual kilowatt hours, but from the certificates that also are generated in parallel to that. So if that is not in place, then you would have to really bank on your contracting. So I guess it's an interplay. And since it's already there by design, it is best if the full arsenal of all these RE Act incentives are implemented to help RE developers.
And I think this is this question is relevant, is related to that previous question. With the gear prices announced, do we see projects being bankable, given the significantly reduced prices from certain technologies compared to their feed-in tariff counterparts?
Actually, that's something that we are also monitoring. So we will see this week how bankable the new numbers are. Because as I mentioned, signification of interest, you were supposed to register even before you found out what the actual price cap would be for your bid. So we will see if all of the, I think over 70 RE generating facilities have signified interest. So we will see if all those will materialize into actual bids sometime this week. And I guess that's how we will tell if the price cap is correct in signaling investment.
Okay, so we're keen to monitor and look at the results.
Yes.
Ideally, the revenue from the RECs would have really supplemented and added to the revenue base of the projects to give them better chances of bankability, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, so we'll pause there, Gian, and we'll proceed with
Sure.
the formal opening the floor for more questions and really opening this to be an industry dialogue. And we would like to request as well, Sir Theo, to turn on your videos for this session. And I would also like to acknowledge Mr. Javi Jalcita and Ms. Claudine Del Rosario, first Vice Presidents of Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, or RCBC Capital, who I understand will also be joining this portion. So before we proceed with getting more questions, feedback, and insights from our community here who joined us, any first thoughts or insights you can share, Javi and Claudine, as listening to our two speakers sharing their thoughts on offshore wind and the green energy auctions program, which from the presentations we see are kind of related, because they do the new technology needs the market making mechanism for predictable revenues, right? To enhance the project bankability. So any insights or questions or thoughts you can share at this juncture? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Allotrope, Theo, for inviting us this afternoon. For RCBC and RCBC Capital, we've really been monitoring these two spaces for the last few years, in particular the GAP. As you know, we do try to, be the arranger for a lot of project finance deals, especially for renewable energy. But like I know, like most of you, like most developers, one of the stumbling blocks is that banks are usually a little bit hesitant to lend to, purely WESM offtake. Well, not really pure offtake agreements, but purely WESM agreements. It's quite difficult for banks because of the instability of the cash flows. So the GF is something that we really have been welcoming, and we've been anticipating for quite some time. In fact, right now, I think we're talking to several developers who will be bidding this particular week. And we're quite excited together with everybody to find out the results of that particular bidding. With regard to offshore wind, we've also been taking a look at it. The potential really is quite high for the country at this point in time, and I think the new government has signaled that this is something that they will be supporting. However, it's not going to be that easy, mainly because there are a lot of issues that need to be tackled. And in particular, I think one issue that we heard and that they need to work on is obviously the transmission. I mean, we're not sure. I think some of the developers are trying to figure out if the grids are already ready to accept that type of energy coming from that source. And then, but we do know there's a lot of foreign funding that has come in or wants to come in to partner with other local developers when it comes to local wind offshore wind. No? Also for the developers who are looking for partners, and of course later on for any project finance that needs to be done. So I guess those are the two things we can add. Those are the two topics that we talked about earlier, and we're excited for both of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Javi. Ma'am Claudine, any
Yeah, sure.
questions? Even
Yes,
questions?
yeah, I think to add to what Javi mentioned earlier, so I think everybody is aware that the banks are really looking at in lending to a project via project finance transactions. As far as maybe as far as RCBC is concerned, we're still not yet there in terms of taking full merchant risk. So we're appreciative of the GIA program, and that's something that we're exploring now. We are also looking at other risks in all our transactions. There are also other risks that we are trying to mitigate and put it in place when we structure our deals. So there are also risks relating to the project site, the land. So that's something that we can also discuss further, or maybe separately with the developers concerned. And then of course the other risks relating to the climate, peace and order situation in the provinces. So those are the things that we feel also that create challenges for these developers, and we're happy to sit down with them. And I want to discuss their issues and see how we can mitigate those risks, and what structure we can provide for their financing.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Claudine, for sharing those thoughts. And I think that leads to a question to Sir Theo. How do we address concerns on grid infrastructure, transmission line development to offshore wind projects? And also it relates to one question from the chat box on ensuring maritime security, as well as making sure that there's environmental clearance for these ocean-based projects. So I think that all relates to risk, environmental and social risk, peace and security risk, as well as product delivery risk with the transmission. So
Correct.
with these with these things already identified this early, how do we make sure these are all addressed to increase bankability of offshore wind projects?
Okay, thank you, Marlon. All good questions, and I'll try to answer as much as I can, no, given that it's very early days in terms of of where we are in offshore wind. But one is that's why I believe, going back to what I discussed earlier, it's quite important to actually have a clear strategy and policy from the government in terms of determining the installation targets and when they actually want or expect these projects to be delivered. No, right now the private sector is the one that really leads these projects. But if there were clear timelines, then the actual planning could be done, and this can now would come. That's where the overall picture and holistic approach to development of the sector would come in, where now you can rope in the different agencies and the different stakeholders like like NGCP and Transco to be able to properly plan, because obviously you have a 7 year pre-development time frame. Normally the NGCP plans its programs on a 5 year span. So obviously there's a lot of overlap on that. If there's enough time to actually tell them we expect it to be done by 2028, 2029, then there's definitely enough time to be able to, for the transmission to be developed by that time. Especially if we're talking about, of course, we're not talking about all of these 178 gigawatts to all come in at 1 year. So obviously it can be spaced out as well. And then we can identify also specific areas in the country where you'd want to prioritize this, and therefore, as Gian also mentioned earlier, tie it up to the CRES policy program that's already been implemented by the DOE. But we haven't really seen much of it actually being implemented. So if you tie all of these up, where they've identified areas that can accept RE, as well as priority areas for the development of transmission, then I really feel that you can address that transmission risk, over the course of the development period until we're actually ready. So that's one. In terms of the others, again, you're right. It's all de-risking, especially in terms of the environmental concerns. And one of the things that I think there's going to be a lot of assistance that can be taken from the banking sector here will be to ensure that the studies being conducted by the developers all meet good international industry practice, especially in terms of the environmental studies that have to be conducted, to ensure that these studies not only comply with what the DNR and other relevant agencies would have here, but also would be able to qualify for funding especially from international lenders by meeting the IFC or the World Bank standards for this now. And I think that's where a lot of assistance would be quite welcome from the financial institutions to help provide what are these standards. So we can also plan in terms of upskilling, of course, the ones who actually have to regulate and evaluate these in the government to move forward. And I think that will again go in a long way in terms of addressing these issues. And again, given enough time, enough planning, and enough coordination among all of these agencies, I think that will address also the other issues in terms of peace and order, because then you can come at least with a security for how to do it. And we've already been in discussions, of course, with some of the ones in terms of maritime safety, in terms of the Coast Guards, in terms of what requirements that they would have to ensure that these corridors for ships in between or through these wind farms would take, as well as what vessels would be allowed and what would be the minimum safe distances between these vessels in between, of course, these turbines. So again, these are all things in progress, I think. But definitely, it's good to note also, of course, that these are some of the concerns that are already being seen. So we can definitely find answers in the coming years.
Yeah, thank you, Sir Theo. And I'm just really curious, is Triconti also involved in onshore wind? And are you participating in the green energy auctions program as well with current?
Yes, we are actually. Correct. We are actually entering into we have entered, and we're fortunate to qualify as one of the bidders for the green energy auction. And as has been said, we're all waiting for how this week will turn out, and we're all curious to see actually who participates. And though I think we all want the green energy auction program to succeed, because I think it's a good start, at least in terms of addressing the market mechanisms needed again for RE to thrive in the country.
Thank you so much for that clarification, Sir Theo. It's just a way for us to really make sure that we can focus our discussion today on the GAP and how to make sure that developers and banks are aligned in terms of thinking in supporting each other's goals, making sure that the revenues from projects are predictable and secure. Given that, Gian, I heard from your presentation that there's an expected excess of 3,000 megawatts of applications from this over 70 developers. Is that correct? Because there's only 2,000 megawatts that will be auctioned off. I mean, at least as rough numbers.
Yeah, I think we just estimated that based on DOE's list. So they did come up
Okay.
with a list of all the eligible bidders, and we matched it with the capacities that are also published on the DOE website. And totaling that, it comes up to around 5,000 megawatts, but it's different RE technologies. So if you would match it, some technologies are oversubscribed for a particular grid, but some are undersubscribed for a particular grid. So
Right.
there are still open slots, but it is quite promising to see that a lot of interest has been generated for the GAP.
Hmm. And is this this brings me back to the feed-in tariff race in 2015. Um, does it make sense to as part of your recommendations, right? Like to a more proactive approach in announcing auctions down the road will be helpful. Can you expound on that? I mean, I think it's something that we understand fully, but we'd like to pick your brains more about that kind of insight and what it could help, how it could help to make sure banks will be excited, developers will be excited, and what policymakers can do in terms of being proactive.
Okay, I guess, well, the need for planning is important because developing a project takes a lot of lead time, as mentioned by Theo kanina. For wind, it takes 5 to 7 years. So it differs according to technology. So if you know ahead of time that, for instance, by 2024, there is a need for X thousand megawatts of a certain RE technology, then you could properly plan on your investments and which one you would prioritize and which one you would time properly to coincide with that. Because one key requirement for you to participate in the GAP is to guarantee that your capacity is fully uncontracted as of contract delivery. So a lot of those that could have been eligible for the GAP were not able, because the requirement is also that you have to be RPS eligible. There are many other RPS eligible plans that could have participated, but because of that requirement for you to be uncontracted as of delivery date, some have not been able to bid because of that. So if it had been announced earlier, you could have arranged your contracting arrangements, you could have offloaded some contracts, and you could have been prepared to build certain facilities in time for delivery. So it's really planning, centralized alignment of all the policies, all the programs that is essentially needed from a central planner, which should be coming from a government entity.
Okay. Yeah, that's very well noted. And in terms of the 2,000 megawatt first green energy auctions program, Sir Javi and Ma'am Claudine, have you had early discussions with some developers about, should they get a slot on for this round of auctions? Can RCBC already support them? What kinds of support have been raised, and what kinds of insights can you share to those in the audience today that are developing projects and are among the 70 developers that are keen to participate in the auctions program?
Okay, I think in general, the view of the bank is that, as I mentioned earlier, it's quite positive towards the GL. I think for us, we really see this as, an alternative to the long-term offtake contracts. that the banks would previously require in the past. So for us, I think we we don't really see any material some problems with collections and the distribution of that. And we've experienced that actually with a few of our clients in the past, and it has caused some problems. But I think in general we're headed the right direction, and I think for as long as you have the long-term offtake contract with, I mean, through the GIAP, then that should be sufficient. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. And then since GF is new to us also, and it's something that we would like to learn more about how it operates, etc. So what we also do to these potential to these developers who are looking at GF, selling to GF, we also try to size the debt based on the for example, the break-even rate, or the break-even what's the minimum rate that we can sell to that would generate the maximum amount of cash flows to service your debt. So that's how we're doing right now. Where when we talk to these developers, when we look at their model, we also run some scenarios on what do you think would be. We saw the GF rates or also posted by Miss Gian. So we can run numbers on what's the maximum capacity that can generate at those levels of rates, and then we size the debt accordingly. So parang it's in effect we're trying to mitigate the risk to us.
Yeah, it's basically right sizing the debt, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, it was very interesting. I think Gian mentioned earlier na yung uncontracted. You should be uncontracted, no? At the time of delivery. That's something that we were actually questioning. That's a question that was on our mind. No? We're also learning more about this as we move along. No? So I was actually asking Claudine earlier, pwede ba yun na you participate in the auction but you already have some long-term offtake contracts, or but yun nga, no? So these are things that we also want to understand a little bit
So it
more
can
about.
be a mix. Yeah.
Yeah.
In that sense, does it mean that for a big project, as long as there are portions that are distributed across several SPVs, for example, is that a way to address that, like a workaround? Because how can you start talking to a bank without long-term contract, but need to make sure that you have that uncontracted capacity to participate in the auctions. So again, I think I'm kind of like confused. If there's a big project, can several SPVs take part of it, and then one SPV bids? Is that is that what's happening, or I don't know?
I think at the minimum, what you can do is to signify which portion of your capacity is uncontracted, and you just have to certify to DOE that that portion is uncontracted by delivery date in 2023.
Okay, it doesn't have to be like a contract from the developer per se, that the whole project is not contracted.
But actually, we have yet to see how DOE will verify the status of a power plant being uncontracted, because they do accept existing plants and incoming plants to participate in the GIAP. And they are following the same set of rules. So we have yet to see how DOE will evaluate that. Two different kinds of pricing models would be in effect, definitely, but we have yet to see how that will result in terms of the winning bidders.
Okay, I think this is one of those conversations that the industry needs to have, because we can support because that's how we can support in terms of getting clarifications without putting anyone in the spotlight, right? Just to make sure that the whole process is governed with transparency. Everyone knows the rules and can really participate to the best of their abilities as developers. In terms of these insights for the GAP, Sir Theo, anything apart from those mentioned about the price, the capacity, and the governance and transparency process, anything else that you can identify or share that needs industry collaboration and cooperation to make sure that the process becomes successful?
Well, okay. One, no, and actually it will have to refer to actually the prices.
Mhm.
I think for Gian, I'm sure no, because one of the things that she mentioned is that you had to go and pre-qualify prior to knowing what the final prices were. That's one. But actually, aside from that, the terms of reference were already brought out, and there is still some questions even regarding the tenure of how long the contract would actually be, because there had been some information shared that the tenure would be about 10 years, all the way ranging from 10 years, 5 years, 12 years, 20 years, 25 years. So it's quite confusing. And one of the things that we know that the industry has constantly asked the ERCs, particularly since they're the ones who are in charge of working on the tariffs, was that whenever they would come out with a draft, was that, have you checked with the financial institutions whether these are tenors and prices that they would be able to support? And I guess that's something that we think that would be very helpful, because it would help at least from the developer perspective, allow us less sleepless nights trying to pull our hair out, trying to figure out whether it's going to be a 10-year tenor, a 5-year tenor, and how that would impact the rates, and as well as if we could actually even get a loan to cover the projects. No? So maybe that's one. Maybe it's a very basic one, but I think that would be very, very welcome from the developers, that even prior to it being brought out, there's a lot of consultation between the ones who will finance the projects and the regulator to ensure that the price is really fair for both the consumers as well as as well as also allows the industry to grow.
Yeah. Thank you, Sir Theo, for that insight. Now, I think it's a good time to ask our friends from RCBC Capital. I'm pretty sure that in your internal models you have some some assumptions on the length of the cash flow of the revenue from the GIAP. What would be some mitigating measures or some ways to address if the tenor of the auctions become shortened compared to the set assumptions from your models? I mean, what has been the process to address a risk like this?
Yeah, I think basically. Oh, sorry.
No problem.
So I think basically what you're asking is what happens if the contracted capacity basically falls short of what do you call this,
The debt service.
the break even
Okay.
contracted capacity, right? Is that
And the guaranteed offtake, the guaranteed revenue from the GIAP offtake is shorter compared to what you've projected?
Yeah, correct. So there are several ways to mitigate that risk. Obviously, on the top priority of the banks really is if we have any sort of guarantees, so to speak, and then the other definitely, I mean, we do put in place other mechanisms such as the reserve accounts and the payment accounts to help us with those. So sometimes what the banks do is during the portion wherein the off-taker, the producer is still trying to look for trying to look for more capacity, so trying to look for more off-take agreements, whether it's a replacement GIAP or similar. Then we do, for example, try to right-size the debt, or we try to probably increase maybe the amount of reserves that we have. I think those are several options that we have. I think Nadine also might have other.
Yeah, I think yes, those are our secrets. We already shared. Those are just some of the key covenants that we are, or some, should I say, mechanisms that we put in place just to cover or mitigate the merchant or that risk that there will be insufficient cash flows coming from the uncontracted capacities. So apart from the more DSRA, or we there's also a cash sweep lock box mechanism that we talk about as well, but that's more complicated. Certainly a guarantee is welcome to us, and of course we look at the sponsors backing up these projects for support, for sponsor support. And then there are other ways also to do it. We can start small, based on we can provide lending at a smaller amount. Then we upsize as and when they contract or they get more contracts or longer tenor of contracts. So those are just some of the mechanisms we put in place.
How about like treating it as a like a guaranteed for a certain capacity, and then the rest will be merchant? Will that also some cash flow expectation from the spot market, for example? Would that be sufficient at this time, or will it be just one of many risk mitigants that you can look at?
Yeah. I think at this point in time, even we're aware that, well, I'll just, in parallel money. Right now, I think we're already seeing that we don't anymore have 100% for long-term offtake contracts, even with our current clients. No, a lot of them are already mixed, ready. They already have resin. So I think we'll just treat it similarly. That we do accept clients with a mixed portfolio, basically, of long-term offtake contracts. In this case, we'll include the GF there, together with some WSM. So that's definitely doable. We don't just say no just because somebody's, although we have WSM, ay, hindi na pwede yan then. No, that's not the way it works. We take a look at what's contracted, whether it be the GF or whether it be an offtake contract, and we see whether those cash flows will be sufficient enough to cover the debt.
But to add, certainly the guarantee is something you would appreciate, especially if it's coming from a reputable sponsor. So guaranteed portion of the project or the capacity is something that we can also explore.
Okay, thank you so much, Sir Javi and Claudine, for your insights. And I saw a raised hand earlier. I'm not sure if that was. You can unmute your microphone if you want to raise a question. Otherwise, I thought I saw someone who wanted to speak from our audience. Can you please confirm? Otherwise, Ivan?
I think that was just a misclick. But
Okay.
if there are audience who wants to speak up, kindly tell us so we can enable them their microphones too, because they can't unmute by themselves. But yeah.
At this juncture, we'll await your advice if you want to speak or raise some questions. But we're also at the end of our industry dialogue. But this is really a start of of several industry dialogues that will cover the green energy auctions program as well as the offshore wind market. Maybe we'll just ask Gian for some like parting thoughts on what we should do together as an industry to make sure that the next very important market making mechanism, the auctions become successful, becomes sustainable and creates opportunities for many. And for like new technologies like offshore wind becomes an industry, a big industry on its own, going towards 2030. What can we do together, and how can we help each other? Eager to hear your thoughts.
I think activities such as this, platforms such as what Allotrope has provided, would be very helpful in fine-tuning the next GAP phases and any other government policy toward the clean energy transition program. Because as we've witnessed in some of those, like for the GOP, key to its, I think, implementation this year was the loud clamor that came from not developers, not industry participants, but actual on the consumer side and from the likes of you, from your group, from Allotrope. So if more stakeholders from outside the energy family would express interest and would express their questions for programs such as the GAP, I think it would help improve the implementation moving forward. So thank you for doing this for us, for giving us this event today to do this.
Yeah, thank you as well for consistently provided your expertise and insights, and your support as we continue to foster this community. Thank you, Gian. Sir Theo, what should we what should we look forward to in the next months or 6 months as an industry, so that we can make sure that we achieve our energy transition goals as ensconced in our national renewable energy plan, and like 1 or 2 things that we should really focus on?
Okay. Thank you again, Marlon, to you, to Ivan, as well to the rest of Allotrope Partners. Because as Gian mentioned, I think what's very important is the dialogue continue between the different stakeholders. It's not just the developers, it's not just the regulators, but it's also the whole, it takes a village to actually build the sector. And I think we're doing it not just for the business, but we actually need it as a country in terms of power our existing requirements, as well as to power the growth that we expect and need actually moving forward with a growing economy and population. What we can expect, I think, is with the incoming administration. So we have to give them some time, I think, to find their footing. But we do hope that the policies and what this administration has started in terms of offshore wind roadmap will be continued and be implemented the soon as possible, because we believe that it's actually set a very good framework that can be followed and implemented. What we do hope would be that because one of the things is that it's clear that there's a plan for offshore wind. The DOE has taken the steps to actually stress it, to fix it up. But then we also believe it's important that this idea be cascaded down into the different agencies, the regional and especially down to local. Because what we've seen is that they are all very supportive, but when you ask them to actually, what do you need to actually move forward in terms of permitting, they're unaware and they don't know, and they toss it back up. So I think it's important for things to move forward would be that coordination would be needed though. And the other one, of course, is continuing dialogues like this among the different sectors. Because as you mentioned, what we have to do, and always in any introduction of a new technology, is to help de-risk it, to make it more viable for all things concerned. And the only way to do that is to talk, understand, and educate ourselves in terms of what the risks are, as well as what the challenges and what the benefits would be, as well as what are the positives that are present already existing in the country to move forward. And we look forward actually to being able to collaborate with all of you here to be able to facilitate that in the months and years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Theo, and eager to hear as well from Sir Javi and Ma'am Claudine. You have now in your audience some developers. How can you support them with their goals in terms of project financing and beyond project financing to enable and realize their projects. Eager to hear your thoughts.
Okay, go.
Sorry, I guess like any financing initiative that we go into, it's really important for us to, come into discussions early with the developers to find out what their concerns are and what they need to make their projects very viable. From our end, we're quite happy really that we have guys like yourselves, Allotrope, to have venues such as these to continue the dialogue. No, we know that the laws, while they're already there, no, we know that they're not really set in stone and that they can be modified. And we've seen that. We've seen already in the past how the laws have evolved to be more accommodative of the needs of all the stakeholders basically for RE. We're very grateful also for organizations such as the NREB who were very instrumental in getting this off the ground. So I guess that's it from me. No, just continue the dialogue. We'll start. We hope we can talk to the developers who are here. I think I've seen some names of people we're already talking to right now.
Yeah, you're welcome to visit us, or we can call you. We can visit you, and then yeah, let's work together and look solutions for your requirements. Where RCBC is very supportive of renewable energy. We have successfully launched several green bonds and RE bonds. And I believe you are aware that we've been supportive of all of most of the renewable energy projects in the Philippines and also offshore. So we look forward to be working with most of you in the future. And thank you, Allotrope, for inviting us.
Thank you so much, and indeed, thank you, Gian, Karla, Theo, Sir Theo, Sir Javi, and Ma'am Claudine. Thank you for sharing your time and insights today. And for those in our audience, thank you for spending the afternoon with us. On behalf of Allotrope Partners and Greening the Banks, thank you everyone for joining us today. And there were a lot of high-level concepts shared today, but also practical insights and next steps that we can take on in the short term. We will be sharing a set of key takeaways to all the participants, and we will clear with our speakers if we can share their presentations. And alongside that, we will also share you the link to the recording of this event. So with that, you can contact us and you can contact me through these details you can see in your screen. And we hope that you all stay safe, healthy, and well, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you again in our next dialogues. Thank you.